I am Lauren Frohne. I am a video journalist at the Seattle Times.
So what's the biggest thing that shifted in this pandemic? What kind of protocols are you taking? When did everything change for you? You're in Seattle, which is like y'all got hit first, right?
Yes, so shit hit the fan, as we like to say,
Seriously.
on February 29th here.
Oh my God.
That is when um, that is when they announced two additional cases and a death from coronavirus. And it was more than a month after the first case was announced. So there was just like this month of just nothing happening. And then that happened. And then things haven't been the same since. Um, I was actually at a Pointer Women's Leadership Academy at the time.
Amazing.
I got back to Seattle on March 3rd, which was a Tuesday. And I mean, I just like came back to just like chaos, basically. All the stuff with the Life Care Center was happening. On that Thursday, I like ran out with one of our investigative journalists to film a press conference that families were having there. And that was like, I would say I mean, everything has changed. Like everything about how we have to do our jobs has changed. But that was definitely like my first time being out and being like, oh my God, like, how am I supposed to be like in this? We're in a press conference where people are just like we were outdoors, but it was like, I'm keeping my distance from these family members who like might have had contact, didn't really have time to like think about all the different things there. You know, I'm like 8 feet away from where they are outdoors, but then there's all these like other media people who are like mingling and talking and then coming back and being near me. And I was just kind of like, holy shit, how are we supposed to do this? And like felt kind of regretful a little bit. Like, should I have been there? This is how are we supposed to do this? But ultimately it was good. I mean, it was like the one opportunity to like hear from those families who were just at the time just seeing like one by one people getting moved out of that nursing home in ambulances and like dying. And it was intense.
That's so scary.
Yeah, it's really scary. And yeah, so since then, it's just been like,
Did you have guidelines at that point, like stay a certain time distance away, or like were you wearing a mask, or was it kind of after that that like has the newsroom given you like you cannot go into certain places, or how have you adapt?
so at that time, um, like it was all very new, right? It was just days from like there's actually an outbreak, and how are we all supposed to operate under this? Like not just in our newsroom, but like in the city and the area. At the time, we were still in the newsroom. We were in the newsroom until the week of I guess like 8th or 9th or whatever. Before they were like, please everyone work remotely. And at that time, like my boss was just like, well, I brought like Clorox wipes and hand sanitizer in my fanny pack, like in the water bottle holders, and like wiped down all my gear when I got back. And my boss was like, stay 6 feet from people. Don't get close to anyone who's had contact with someone who has the disease. And it's just like, it was a lot to think about and overwhelming, even in that moment. And we were like outdoors and um, yeah. And luckily for me, one of my best friends is an infectious disease doctor. And so she's like a good resource to sort of like talk out, like, was this the right way to go about this? Or like, should I be concerned about this? Or I'm thinking I'm going to go shoot this. What are the risks? That's really helpful. But generally, like our newsroom has not really issued blanket like this is how we expect you to act, but everyone's working from home. Of course, the photo and video staff can't do that really in any capacity. But our editors and like the newsroom or like the photo leadership, they don't want us going into people's homes. We're supposed to stay 6 or more feet away from people. Uh, but there, yeah. So and for me as a video journalist, like it's forced me to think about new ways to do my reporting. And you know, I posted this on Instagram yesterday, but like we're trying to do our jobs well while doing like everything wrong, like everything we've learned to do as like visual journalists, which is like, you know, if your pictures aren't interesting enough, you're not close enough, like that kind of stuff. um you know, you can't go into people's homes, you can't spend significant amount of time with them in like as they live their lives, and like you can't even put like lavalier mics on people. Like there's just so much that like you just have to like let go of some of that control you might have over like audio and like the situations you're in, and figure out, you know, some problem solving around that. Where, you know, I'm doing most of my interviews over Zoom, like unless it's like it feels like a safe enough place outside and I can, you know, it feels like I can get decent audio from 6 feet away or using like a boom pole or something. But I'm using Zoom a lot. I'm relying on people's pictures and video that they make quite a bit. And that was a big part of the Wynn family story.
Can you
Uh,
talk about that story? Because I was like, um, I was blown away by like you were working within the confines of everything you're talking about. Like you were outside of their house, you filmed like things outside of their house, they were engaging, but also you still managed to get to like the emotional core of the story that I thought was really powerful. So can you talk a little bit about that? How you worked around all those? Yeah.
yeah. So we met the family um, a couple weeks ago because we were doing a story about how senior citizens are coping and dealing with isolation and just, you know, being an at-risk group. And Vince, the son that we talked to, he had posted on Facebook the night that his father went into the ER and shared his story that way, and that's how it came to our attention. And so like, you know, from the beginning, you know that it's someone who's really open and a really good communicator and, you know, willing to be vulnerable in front of people, and that really helps. um, and so the first time we went out there, their father was still in the hospital and they didn't know what was going to happen. um, and so my colleague Erica and I went over to their house. So this guy had been in the nursing home that week that his father contracted the virus.
Oh
And
gosh.
so he was quarantining himself, and his spouse was feeling like, you know, was having a cough and a fever. And so they like weren't leaving their like yard, which is like a fenced in yard. And so we talked to him from like 10 plus feet away, like in the street, and like made some portraits and video portraits and stuff. And, you know, like I've found it really helpful just to like film lots of details around people, like what their environment looks like.
The
That
dog in
helps.
the fence was unbelievable.
Oh my God, isn't that so cute?
The
The
cutest thing
like
ever.
dog little porthole. Um, but yeah, and we hung out there. And on the way there, I called my boss and was like, we're going to this person's house, you know, and I told him the story. And, you know, he's not sick, but he's been exposed most likely. And I was like, we were thinking of doing like a interview from far away. And after talking it out with my boss, it was like, no, we shouldn't do that. I should do this one over Zoom. Like then it can be longer, it can be more intimate because like you are face to face, even though it's through the computer. So at that night, actually, that was like Thursday, I think, that we went to his house. That night, early morning, the next day, his father died. And so then like the reporter we had worked on for the senior story, we all wanted to like follow their story a little bit more. But, you know, this is like a horrible thing that's happened. And there were several days where it was like, you know, they weren't really in contact with us, and you know, we didn't know what would be available to see and stuff like that. And then as of like Thursday, they all like came back on the radar. And like Vince and I had like planned to do a video interview, but then that day his dad died, so that got clearly canceled. And then yeah, so part of that was just like hoping something would come through and just being really flexible, like whenever something would come up again. Um, and then, yeah, so we got back in touch with Vince that day, and he was fine with us coming to their house at like 10 o'clock while he was on this like family prayer with his siblings and his mom that they do over like video chat. And Erica and I stood in the yard at like
Oh my
10 o'clock
gosh.
at night and like filmed through the window. My 100 to 400 lens has been like, that's been like my only lens I use. I mean, I use it a lot already, but like now I'm like exclusively using it because it's
Yeah.
also a good tool because it's like you, in order to get any visual variety, you have to be far away, right? So it doesn't let you get too close. And that's, I have found that helpful because I have found that you just naturally creep toward people as you're talking to them. And it's really hard to like catch yourself doing that. And so like having some sort of mark on the ground, having your lens be super long so you can't get close, that helps. And then,
Also, psychologically, that's probably helpful to just know there's like a very clear visual marker of I'm too close, you know?
yeah, and it lets you, because I have found it quite exhausting to try to like, you're negotiating all these things aside from just like focusing on the story and your job and all the components of audio and your visuals and
Yeah, there's
thinking
already
about
so
it.
many technical things. We don't need more.
Yeah, there's technical things, and then also like, am I getting the right stuff for the story? Is this all going to build into something? My shot list, like all this stuff. And then you're also like, am I touching things? Did I touch my face? Did I do this, do that? And so like I have found, one of the things that helps is using the longer lens, because then it's just one less thing I need to like be keeping track of. And so then we were able to talk with Vince in person, which was really helpful that night, like through the doorway from like 10 feet away, and met him at the cemetery the next day. So I had filmed these three scenes.
Mhm.
Oh, and the day prior, his sister was sharing a bunch of the video clips with me and the reporter
That's so
of
helpful.
when their dad, from the hospital. And so I kind of was like building all these things in my head, like, what can I do? And then finally was able to do the interview with Vince on that Friday. And like, it's weird to do video interviews. And actually like an hour into our interview, like like my internet crapped out, and it was like peak emotion. We're talking about like what it all means for him and like looking back and like all that their family's been through, and he's like getting emotional, and then it freezes and and I had to like restart. But it's like you just have to go with it, that's just how it works. So like we got back on the call, and so like our interview was about an hour and a half, and it was surprisingly like I felt like I could interview the same, very similarly to how I can in person over video. It's exhausting, and like the other day I did like three Zoom interviews in one day, and I was just like completely wiped, because it's like a lot. It's a lot to like try to be engaging and stuff with people on video chat, and
And it's like you're not, these aren't easy stories. These are particularly grueling topics. So even just one
yeah.
of those a day is
and
exhausting in itself, you know?
and this story, it's like, I mean, Jesse was here watching me go through this whole edit and stuff, and it's just like, these are the like some of the hardest stories to do, because I mean we talk to people about hard topics a lot, but like it's really rare that like someone's dad died like days prior, and I'm like, tell me about your dad dying, like it's just really hard stuff to ask people, and it doesn't always feel good to like,
Yeah.
I mean, he said it was like therapy. It was nice to talk to someone who wasn't one of his siblings about it, and like, that's reassuring. But like, I'm not a licensed therapist, and it is. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to, and it's draining to ask people those like really hard questions.
Yeah.
Um, and then I had to just like, I spent basically all of Saturday going through the interview, doing my highlighting, trying to figure out like the groupings and themes that I could address, and then storyboarded it using my beat sheet on Sunday morning, and then yeah, put it I think I worked all day till like 2 in the morning to get it done. But
Do you usually do the interview first, or do you usually do the interview? Is it usually like you spend a lot of time with someone and then you do the interview?
it depends. I I like to get the interview pretty early for any story, just because like that usually is your story. And so like in my head, I'm like, I have nothing until I have like the interview or like whatever that narrative component is. Not everything is interview driven, but a lot of it can be. But yeah, to me, I'm like, I don't have a story until I have that interview. And so waiting until Friday to do it was like crazy. Like, the editors kept asking me like the status, and I'm like, I have nothing, like nothing. I will see what I can come up with. But I was like, we can't just use the family's video clips on their own. Like I don't feel comfortable doing that. Just like putting that out there, it needs context. It needs someone to like walk us through to the point so that we feel what they're feeling in that moment. Um,
I think that's
which
really smart. I think you did a really good job with that, because I think it makes you understand the context of all this so much more than just seeing that, you know?
Yeah, and they are just like they're a really incredible family. Like they've been through a lot, and a lot that wasn't covered in the video story. Like aside from, fleeing their country as like with a bunch of small children and being at sea for a year and um, you know, living in a refugee camp and moving to a new country and trying to build a life from nothing, essentially. They like worked in berry fields and
Wow.
um, 14 of them living in a 2-bedroom apartment. Like they've been, and one of their sons died like 20 years ago when he was in college. And it was a really tragic thing. So like they've been through a lot, um, which is, I hope it's captured that like they bring to it this experience, that same resilience and like family connection. And not everybody has that in
Yeah.
this, like in what's unfolding here. But yeah, I spent a lot of time using my beat sheet to figure out what role in the story each scene and each theme, like where does the backstory go. And because it's a fairly chronological story, but like there are definitely places where you can strategically use the backstory and build toward that peak emotional point, and then kind of like give some resolution and figuring out what scene to use. Like, what do I use this like home outdoor b-roll for? Like it's a little bit of a puzzle in that way. And you want to be like respectful. You don't want to go like zero to like weeping,
Yeah.
because then your viewers are just not going to be there with you. Um,
I thought you did
but
a really, really amazing job.
thanks. It was a hard, like I don't know if I've ever just like openly cried like in my editing room, like just looking at footage and listening to things like I did for this. Like
Yeah.
it was, yeah.
I think
And
it's,
actually like driving to the cemetery and like by myself, because my colleague and I were not like driving in the same cars together and stuff, which is hard. Like you can't like talk out the story with someone when you're on your way there like you normally would. So like we'll like call each other while we're driving, like one behind the other. But yeah, I was like by myself driving to the cemetery and just like envisioning how the story could work and like the words I would use to describe it and stuff like that. And I just like started crying in my car. Like yeah, it
I
was,
think that I think that like everyone who's working is also being like, we're consuming all these stories, and then you're experiencing this with someone else and trying to do it justice. And like, I can't imagine the like fatigue that you feel, that is just like emotional fatigue after having to tell all these stories and do it, really turn it around. So I think you're
yeah,
not the only journalist that's like cried on the way to an assignment in the past few weeks, you know?
yeah, it is. I mean, this is like, I mean, I would say the only similar experience I have to this in terms of like working is covering like the BP oil spill, which was like a natural disaster, and just like, watching people's lives fall apart and stuff. Like it's oddly similar in a lot of ways. which I think that reporting experience has really prepared me for this, also to like see where story potential is and where it's not, and like what are efforts that we should be highlighting and what are efforts that are like not as useful, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like
um
judgment for sure.
yeah, but yeah, this story, it was definitely, yeah, it was hard. And then it was like, yeah, so, and then I was just exhausted because I stayed up, like, I don't usually stay up all night to like finish stories. It's not really my MO at this point in my career.
Just
But
for just for boot camp or
yeah, just for
immersion.
immersion.
Yeah, just for immersion.
That's my one day of the year where I stay up till 2, finishing stories. But no, I was up till like 2 finishing this.
Yeah.
And because it needed to run, it needed to be out there sooner than later.
Yeah.
And I was just so tired the next day that like I'd like talk to my parents on the phone, and like how my dad was going grocery shopping and like wearing a mask and gloves, and I just like burst into tears again. So it's just, you just like carry all these things with you, and
Yeah.
it's yeah, this is like one of the most emotional things I've covered.
And you guys have been in it for so much longer. I want to be cognizant of your time because I think you have another meeting, so I want to bounce. But
Okay.
um, no, you were saying that, the peak, that it really started in February. And for us, like by March 13th, people were still deciding if this was a thing, like if we were going to have classes in person on campus, So you've been in this for a lot longer too.
Yeah, that first week, like I guess it was, what week was it that everything started closing here? I think it was about a week before everywhere else. So maybe the week of the 8th.
Yeah.
I think it was the week of the 8th. And we started working from home and like figuring out like the way we all communicate in the newsroom. And it was just like this deluge of just like, and now this, and now this. And like, I had this like blistering headache all week. And I realized it was because I was like clenching my teeth so hard and just was like this like ball of anxiety, and also just like stressed about like, how do I do my job in this? Like, how do I work? And I think I have found those ways that like I can be smart and creative and resourceful using Zoom interviews, like talking at length with people on the phone, figuring out what's going on, so you can like just go for a minimal amount of time outside, far away, and they know what you're doing. And Erica and I keep joking that, our jobs were already pretty creepy. Like you hang out and like watch people do things. And now it's gotten even creepier because now you're doing that like through their windows.
Like a telephoto lens. Yeah.
And we weren't sure if this like cemetery would let us film in it. And so like I brought a step ladder because we didn't know if we would need to film over this hedge. like I was like, we've just like reached a whole new level of creepy, lurking outside people's houses and stuff.
But it was worth it. It was all really worth it. So
Yes. And now I need to think about the next story I'm going to work on, it feels endless. I mean, there's a lot of stories to be told.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. I just want to say thank you. I really, really
Yeah.
appreciate it. I'm going to make them watch the piece and then have their thoughts, and then they get to hear from you. One of the things that I also thought was really interesting was just one of the stories that popped in was, I think the priest that has to go give last rites would be kind of an interesting story. I don't know if you thought about that, but I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, and it's just we can't even go into those ICUs and
Mhm.
stuff. Like, I mean, that was like one of the incredible things about this family is that there's so many of them. And I mean, the thing that like made me the most emotional, there were a few things like those pressure points, but like when he talks about being able to be in the parking lot, like that just like
Yeah.
devastates me every time. But like, because there were so many of them, the sister that was able to be there like filmed all of this, and like and I asked them, I was like, are you okay if they'd like use this? And they were so open about it and like wanted people to see what they went through. And like that's just like so rare to like have that glimpse of like that kind of event in people's lives. It's like extremely vulnerable and completely self-produced. like but yeah, they
That
were
makes
just
it,
really incredible.
yeah. And I think that makes it, it's so authentic. It's like more authentic than if you had to have been there. You know what I mean? I,
Yeah.
I think it, yeah, it's really powerful.